Cults have been around forever, and a lot of them are pretty scary or at least interesting. So today I wanted to cover an iceberg that goes over a lot of the leaders of these cults. Because the cults are all really scary and evil, but all that evil ultimately comes from the leader, the person who's forcing this on to everybody else. So without further ado, join my Discord, follow my Instagram. I'm actually trying to hit 100k by the end of the year, and I think we can do it with your help, so please subscribe for more of this kind of content, scary content. Anyways, let's just get straight into this iceberg. Starting with Ron Hubbard. Ron Hubbard is a complex and controversial figure, best known as the founder of the Church of Scientology. Born in 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska, Hubbard led a varied life that included stints as a pulp fiction writer, a naval officer, and ultimately the creator of a new religious movement. Hubbard's early life was marked by frequent moves and adventures. His father was a naval officer, which meant the family relocated often. This instability, combined with a keen interest in adventure and exploration, likely influenced Hubbard's later endeavors. He claimed to have traveled extensively in Asia during his youth, though the veracity of these claims has been questioned. In the 1930s and 1940s, Hubbard made a name for himself as a prolific writer of pulp fiction, particularly in the science fiction genre. He was known for his vivid imagination and ability to churn out stories rapidly. However, it was in 1950 that he made his most significant impact with the publication of Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. In this book, Hubbard introduced his theories on the human mind, positing that past traumas, or engrams, could be cleared through a process called auditing. This process, he claimed, would lead to a state of clear, free from the limitations imposed by these engrams. The success of Dianetics was immediate, and Hubbard quickly capitalized on the popularity by founding the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation. However, the movement faced significant challenges, including financial troubles and skepticism from the medical and psychological communities. Despite these obstacles, Hubbard persisted, and in 1953, he founded the Church of Scientology. Scientology offered a more structured and religious framework for his ideas. The church's teachings included concepts like thetans, which are considered the true spiritual essence of individuals, and a hierarchical system of spiritual development. Hubbard's leadership was marked by a mix of strict organizational control and a knack for promoting Scientology as both a spiritual and a practical guide to life. Hubbard's life was not without controversy, though. He faced numerous legal challenges and accusations, including allegations of fraud and abuse. In 1967, he took to the seas with a group of devoted followers, establishing the Sea Organization, or Sea Org, a highly dedicated and secretive group within Scientology. This period saw Hubbard becoming increasingly reclusive and enigmatic. Despite the controversies, Hubbard remained a central figure in Scientology until his death in 1986. He left behind a legacy of both devoted followers and vehement critics. Scientology, under the leadership of David Miscavige, continues to be a powerful and controversial force, with its origins still deeply rooted in Hubbard's teachings and personality. I just think it's funny how this whole religion was based on a guy whose main claim to fame was like being a storyteller. So that just pretty much like confirms that everything he taught in his church is just a complete like lie. It's just made up fiction, like the volcano aliens and everything. Next up, we have Jim Jones. Jim Jones is one of the most infamous cult leaders in modern history, primarily known for orchestrating the Jonestown Massacre in 1978. His life is a pretty stark reminder of the dangers of charismatic leadership combined with absolute power and control over followers, which is really what makes a cult pretty scary, right? James Warren Jones was born in 1931 in Crete, Indiana. From a young age, he exhibited a strong interest in religion and social issues. He was known for his intense personality and early fascination with the power of religious leaders. This early interest set the stage for his future as a cult leader. In the 1950s, Jones founded the People's Temple in Indianapolis. Initially, the church was a force for social good, advocating for racial integration and supporting the poor and disenfranchised. Jones's message of equality and social justice attracted a diverse group of followers. However, beneath this positive exterior, Jones harbored grandiose ambitions and a desire for absolute control. By the 1960s, the People's Temple had grown significantly, and Jones moved the church to California, where it continued to expand. During this period, Jones's sermons became increasingly radical. He preached about an impending apocalypse and positioned himself as a messianic figure who could save his followers. His ability to captivate and manipulate people was evident, and he exercised strict control over his followers' lives, including their finances, relationships, and movements. In the mid-1970s, facing growing media scrutiny and allegations of abuse within the People's Temple, Jones decided to move his congregation to Guyana, South America. Or wait, I think I pronounced that wrong, hold on. Yeah, it's Guyana, South America, my fault, guys. There, he established Jonestown, a supposed utopian community where his followers could live free from outside interference. However, the reality of Jonestown was far from utopian. Jones's control over his followers intensified, and the settlement operated more like a prison camp, with armed guards and severe punishment for dissent. In 1978, concerned relatives and former members of the People's Temple persuaded U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan to visit Jonestown to investigate the reported abuses. Ryan's visit quickly turned disastrous. Some residents expressed a desire to leave with Ryan, which enraged Jones. As Ryan and his party prepared to depart, they were ambushed and attacked by Jones's loyalists at the airstrip, resulting in the deaths of Ryan and several others. Realizing that his dream of a utopian community was unraveling, Jones initiated a horrific plan. On November 18th, 1978, he ordered his followers to participate in a mass, quote, revolutionary sewer slide. Over 900 people, including children, were coerced or forced to drink a cyanide-laced drink. Jones himself was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head, believed to be self-inflicted. I've heard stories about Jim Jones before, but I never really knew the extent of it until I was researching this, and it's pretty crazy. The next one we have is pretty well known, but still pretty interesting to learn about. And of course, I'm talking about Charles Manson. Charles Manson is a notorious figure in American history, best known for leading the Manson family, a cult responsible for a series of brutal murders in 1969. His life and actions are a chilling example of how charisma and manipulation can lead to horrifying outcomes. So, born in 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, Manson had a troubled childhood marked by neglect and frequent run-ins with the law. His mother was an unwed teenager who struggled to care for him, and he spent much of his early life in and out of juvenile institution. By the time he was an adult, Manson was well acquainted with crime and had spent significant time in prison. Upon his release from prison in 1967, Manson moved to San Francisco, where he became involved in the counterculture movement. He quickly gathered a group of devoted followers, predominantly young women, who were drawn to his charisma and unconventional ideas. Manson preached a blend of apocalyptic prophecy, race war, and the belief that he was a messianic figure. In 1968, Manson and his followers relocated to the Spahn Ranch near Los Angeles, where they lived communally. Manson's teachings became increasingly radical, focusing on an impending apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter, a term that he borrowed from the Beatles song. He believed that the murders would spark this racial conflict, after which he and his followers would emerge as the new rulers of the world. Manson's delusions turned deadly in August 1969. Over 2 nights, his followers, acting on his orders, committed a series of gruesome murders. On the night of August 8th to 9th, they brutally killed actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, and 4 others at Tate's home. The following night, they murdered Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy couple, in their homes. These murders were marked by their shocking brutality and the random nature of the victims, which sent waves of fear through Los Angeles and the nation. The investigation into the murders eventually led to the arrest of Manson and several of his followers. Their trial was a media sensation, revealing the bizarre and horrific nature of Manson's influence over them. Manson himself did not physically participate in any of the murders, but he was convicted of first-degree murder for directing them. In 1971, Manson and several of his followers were sentenced to death, a sentence later commuted to life imprisonment when California temporarily abolished the death penalty. Manson spent the rest of his life in prison, where he remained a figure of morbid fascination until his death in 2017. Alright, from here on out, we're getting into ones that I've never heard of, which I don't know if that's just me being very undereducated or if there's just a lot of cult leaders that we don't really talk about. So next up we have Shoko Asahara. Shoko Asahara, born Chizuo Matsumoto in 1955 in Japan, is best known as the founder and leader of the Om Shirinkyo cult, responsible for the deadly Tokyo subway sarin gas attack in 1995. His life and actions reveal a disturbing blend of spiritual manipulation and, the same things as earlier, apocalyptic visions, blah blah blah. Asahara's early life was marked by struggles. He was partially blind and attended a school for the blind, where he developed a reputation for bullying and dominating his peers. Despite his aspirations to study medicine, he was unable to secure any admission to a university, leading him to pursue acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine instead. In the 1980s, Asahara became increasingly interested in various spiritual practices and religions, eventually founding Om Shinrikyo in 1984. 1994. Initially, this group presented itself as a blend of Hindu and Buddhist beliefs with a focus on meditation and physical training. Asahara, who claimed to have achieved enlightenment, attracted followers with his promises of spiritual liberation and salvation. However, as the group grew, Asahara's teachings took a darker turn. He began to prophesy about an impending apocalypse, which he claimed only his followers could survive. He positioned himself as a messianic figure who would lead his followers through the coming chaos. This apocalyptic vision and his claims of supernatural powers such as levitation and mind control drew in thousands of followers, including many highly educated individuals. By the early 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo had amassed significant wealth and influence. They purchased land, built facilities, and even sought recognition as a religious organization in Japan, which granted them tax-exempt status. However, beneath the surface, the group was becoming increasingly militarized and secretive. Asahara's paranoia grew, and he began to view the Japanese government and society as enemies. This paranoia culminated in the group's most notorious act, the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack on March 20th, 1995. Aum Shinrikyo members released sarin gas, a deadly nerve agent, on several Tokyo subway trains during rush hour. The attack killed 13 people and injured over 1,000, causing widespread panic and bringing international attention to this cult's activities. The attack was intended to destabilize the government and initiate the apocalyptic scenario Asahara had predicted. The Japanese authorities swiftly responded, raiding Aum Shinrikyo compounds and arresting Asahara and other high-ranking members. The investigations revealed a disturbing array of criminal activities, including other attempted and successful murders, kidnappings, and other chemical weapons production. Asahara was eventually convicted of numerous crimes, including murder and orchestrating the Tokyo subway attack. In 2004, he was sentenced to death, a sentence that was carried out not until 2018. Despite his execution, the legacy of Aum Shinrikyo lingers, with remnants of the group still existing under different names. That's kinda scary. Alright, next up we have Marshall Applewhite. Marshall Applewhite, also known as Doe, was the co-founder and leader of the Heaven's Gate cult, notorious for the mass side of his members in 1997. Born in 1931 in Spur, Texas, Applewhite grew up in a religious family. His father was a Presbyterian minister. Applewhite initially pursued a conventional life, earning a degree in philosophy and later studying theology. He served in the US military and eventually found his way into teaching music at universities. However, his life took a dramatic turn in the early 1970s following a series of personal and professional setbacks, including the end of his marriage and losing his job. In 1972, Applewhite met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a strong interest in the occult and metaphysical topics. Together, they formed a close partnership, believing that they had been chosen for a divine mission. They began traveling across the United States, attracting followers with their unique blend of Christian apocalypticism and science fiction. They claimed to be the two prophesied in the Bible's book of Revelation, tasked with preparing humanity for a transition to a higher level of existence. By the mid-1970s, Applewhite and Nettles, who took the names Doe and T, respectively, had established a group called Human Individual Metamorphosis, or HIM, later known as Heaven's Gate. They taught that the Earth was on the verge of being recycled and that the only way to survive was to leave the planet. This, they claimed, could be achieved by rejecting all earthly attachments and following their teachings to ascend to a higher extraterrestrial level of existence. The group's beliefs included the idea that the human body was merely a vessel for the soul and that true salvation involved shedding this physical form. They adopted strict communal living practices, renouncing personal possessions, family ties, and even sexual relationships. Applewhite, in particular, emphasized celibacy, and several male members, including Applewhite himself, underwent voluntary castration. In 1985, Bonnie Nettles died of cancer, a significant blow to Applewhite and the group. Despite her death, Applewhite continued to lead Heaven's Gate, further radicalizing their beliefs. He increasingly emphasized the need for a dramatic departure from Earth, which he claimed could be facilitated by an extraterrestrial spaceship. Now, this apocalyptic vision reached its climax in 1997 when Applewhite became convinced that a spaceship was trailing the Hale-Bopp comet. Believing that the spacecraft would take them to a higher plane of existence, he convinced his followers to prepare for their final departure. On March 26, 1997, police discovered the bodies of 39 Heaven's Gates members, including Applewhite, in a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. They had died in a carefully carefully orchestrated mass suicide, consuming a lethal mixture of phenobarbital and alcohol. The Heaven's Gate mass suicide shocked the world and drew attention to the powerful influence of cults and charismatic leaders. Like Applewhite's ability to convince educated and seemingly rational individuals to end their lives is just crazy, and it really highlights the vulnerabilities of human psychology. Anyways, next up we have Adam Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt is best known as the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, a secret society that has become the subject of countless conspiracy theories. His life and work are often shrouded in mystery and speculation, but a closer look reveals a man driven by Enlightenment ideals and a desire to reform society. Born in 1748 in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, Weishaupt was raised in a staunchly Catholic environment. Orphaned at a young age, he was taken in by his godfather, Johann Adam Freiherr von Eichstätt, who was a prominent academic. Weishaupt was educated at a Jesuit school, which significantly influenced his thinking, although he eventually grew disillusioned with the Jesuits' control over Bavarian intellectual and public life. In 1772, Weishaupt became a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt. As a scholar, he was deeply influenced by Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire and Rousseau, who advocated for reason, secularism, and the separation of church and state. Weishaupt shared the belief that society could be improved through knowledge and rational thought. Frustrated by the dominance of the Catholic Church and the lack of intellectual freedom, Weishaupt sought to create an organization that would promote Enlightenment principles. In 1776, he founded the Order of the Illuminati, initially known as the Perfectibilists. The Illuminati aimed to foster enlightenment, moral improvement, and secularism through a network of free-thinking individuals. Weishaupt envisioned a society where rationalism and meritocracy would replace religious and monarchical authority. The Illuminati was structured as a secret society influenced by the Freemasons with various degrees of initiation and hierarchical ranks. Members were encouraged to pursue knowledge, support each other's intellectual endeavors, and work towards societal reforms. Weishaupt's vision extended to influencing politics and spreading Enlightenment ideas throughout Europe. The Illuminati was structured as a secret society inspired by the Freemasons with various degrees of initiation and hierarchical ranks. Members were encouraged to pursue knowledge, support each other's intellectual endeavors, and work towards societal reforms. Weishaupt's vision extended to influencing politics and spreading Enlightenment ideas throughout Europe. However, the secrecy and radical ideas of the Illuminati attracted suspicion. The society's growing influence, particularly among the Freemasons, alarmed the authorities. In 1784, the Bavarian government issued an edict banning all secret societies, including the Illuminati. The crackdown intensified the following year when documents outlining the Illuminati's goals and inner workings were discovered and published. Weishaupt was forced to flee Ingolstadt, eventually finding refuge in Gotha under the protection of Duke Ernst II of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. Now, despite the oppression of the Illuminati, the society's legacy endured. The organization's mysterious nature and ambitious goals captured the public's imagination, which led to numerous conspiracy theories that still persist to this day. Weishaupt himself spent the remainder of his life in relative obscurity, working as a librarian and continuing his scholarly pursuits until his death in 1830. Alright, next up we have Amy Carlson. Amy Carlson, also known as Mother God, was the leader of the Love Has Won cult, which gained notoriety for its bizarre beliefs and practices, as well as the mysterious circumstances surrounding her death in 2021. So now, born in 1975 in Dallas, Texas, Carlson's early life was relatively unremarkable. She worked various jobs and had several children. In the early 2000s, she became involved in New Age spirituality, which marked the beginning of her transformation into a cult leader. Carlson claimed to have had profound spiritual experiences and began to assert that she was a divine being, specifically the incarnation of God on Earth. By 2006, she had fully embraced her identity as Mother God and founded the Love Has Won movement. The group combined elements of New Age beliefs, including concepts like ascension, spiritual healing, and extraterrestrial intervention. Carlson's teachings were eclectic, drawing on various sources and often centered around the idea that she was here to save humanity from impending doom. Carlson and her followers used the internet, particularly social media and YouTube, to spread their message. They produced videos and live streams in which Carlson would deliver sermons, provide spiritual guidance, and make outlandish claims about her divine powers and imminent global changes. This online presence allowed them to attract followers from around the world, despite the group's relatively small physical size. Life within the Love Has Won community was tightly controlled. Followers were expected to adhere to strict rules and often had to donate money and possessions to the group. Carlson's behavior became increasingly erratic and abusive, with reports of severe punishments for disobedience and physical and emotional mistreatment. Followers were often isolated from their families and subjected to harsh harsh living conditions. The group's activity attracted media attention and concern from families of members who described Love Is One as a dangerous cult. In 2020, a series of exposés highlighted the group's abusive practices and bizarre rituals, bringing them under increased scrutiny. In April 2021, Amy Carlson's body was discovered in a state of advanced decomposition in a home in Colorado, adorned with Christmas lights and glitter. The circumstances of her death were mysterious, and the group claimed that she had ascended to a higher plane. Authorities arrested several group members on charges related to the mishandling of her corpse. The autopsy revealed that Carlson had died from a combination of factors, including chronic alcohol abuse, anorexia, and colloidal silver poisoning, the latter being a substance that she frequently promoted as a cure-all. That's just messed up, man. Alright, next we have David Koresh. David Koresh, born Vernon Wayne Howell in 1959, is best known as the leader of the Branch Davidians, a religious sect that became infamous for the Waco siege in 1993. His life and actions culminated in a tragic standoff with federal authorities, resulting in a significant loss of life and a lasting impact on American society. So, Koresh's early life was tumultuous. Born in Houston, Texas, to a teenage mother and an absent father, he had a troubled childhood characterized by instability and neglect. He struggled academically and had difficulties fitting in, eventually dropping out of high school. In his early 20s, Koresh experienced a religious awakening and joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but his radical interpretations of the Bible led to his expulsion. In the early 1980s, Koresh joined the Branch Davidians, an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church based near Waco, Texas. He pretty quickly rose to prominence within the group, claiming to be the final prophet and adopting the name David Koresh to signify his spiritual rebirth. Koresh preached about the imminent apocalypse and positioned himself as the Lamb of God who would lead his followers through the end times. Under Koresh's leadership, the Branch Davidians lived a communal lifestyle at the Mount Carmel Center, engaging in rigorous Bible study and preparing for the apocalypse. Koresh asserted total control over his followers' lives, including their finances and personal relationships. He practiced polygamy, taking multiple wives, some of whom were reportedly underage, and fathering numerous children. Koresh's activities and the group's stockpiling of weapons drew the attention of law enforcement. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, began investigating the Branch Davidians for alleged firearms violations. This investigation culminated in a raid on February 28, 1993. The initial raid led to a fierce gun battle, resulting in the deaths of 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians. Following the failed raid, a 51-day standoff ensued between the Branch Davidians and federal authorities, including the FBI. During this siege, Koresh communicated with negotiators, expressing his apocalyptic beliefs and refusal to surrender. The situation became increasingly tense, with concerns growing over the welfare of the children inside the compound. On April 19, 1993, the FBI launched an assault on the Mount Carmel Center using tear gas in an attempt to force the Branch Davidians out. A fire broke out during the assault, quickly engulfing the compound. The blaze resulted in the deaths of 76 people, including David Koresh and many women and children. The cause of the fire remains disputed, with some believing that it was started by the Branch Davidians and others suggesting that it may have been an unintended consequence of the assault. This is just sad, man. The kids in there, that's just sad, dude. Next up, we have Brigham Young. Brigham Young was a pivotal figure in American religious history, known for his leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and for leading the Mormon pioneers to what is now Utah. Born in 1801 in Whittingham, Vermont, Young grew up in a large family and worked as a farmer, carpenter, and glazier. In 1832, he was introduced to the Book of Mormon and was baptized into the Church of Christ, which later became known as the LDS Church, or Latter-day Saints. Young quickly rose through the ranks, demonstrating strong organizational and leadership skills. After the death of Joseph Smith, the founder of the LDS Church in 1844, a leadership crisis ensued. Young emerged as the leader of the majority faction of the church, largely due to his position as the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and his charismatic leadership. He led the church through a period of intense persecution and violence, particularly in Nauvoo, Illinois, where Smith was killed. In 1846, Young began leading the Mormon exodus from Illinois to the Rocky Mountains, seeking a safe haven where the followers could practice their faith without persecution. This arduous journey, known as the Mormon Pioneer Trek, saw thousands of Mormons traveling across the American frontier under harsh conditions. Young's leadership was instrumental in ensuring the survival and morale of the group. In 1847, Young and his followers arrived in the Salt Lake Valley, where he famously declared, "This is the right place." Under his direction, the Mormons established Salt Lake City and began building a thriving community in the Utah Territory. Young's vision discretion and organizational skills helped transform the arid religion into a productive area through irrigation and communal labor. Young served as the first governor of the Utah Territory from 1851 to 1858, appointed by President Millard Fillmore. His tenure was marked by efforts to maintain a theocratic society where church and state were closely intertwined. This period also saw tensions between the federal government and the Mormon community, culminating in the Utah War, a standoff between Mormon militia and federal troops that was eventually resolved without major bloodshed. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of Young's leadership was his staunch defense and practice of polygamy. He had over 50 wives and fathered numerous children, a practice that drew significant criticism and legal challenges from both within and outside the LDS Church. Despite the controversies, though, Young's influence over the church and the Utah community remained strong until his death in 1877. Alright, next up we have Hon Ming Moon. Hon Ming Moon was the founder of the Unification Church, a religious movement known for its controversial beliefs and practices, including mass weddings and significant political and economic influence. Born in 1920 in what is now North Korea, Moon grew up in a farming family. His early life was marked by the Japanese occupation of Korea, which influenced his nationalist sentiments and desire for Korean unification. In 1936, Moon claimed to have had a vision of Jesus Christ instructing him to complete the mission of establishing God's kingdom on earth, a vision that would shape his life's work. Moon's religious journey led him to study various Christian denominations and Eastern philosophies. After the end of World War II, he began preaching his interpretations of the Bible and his unique revelations, which eventually formed the basis of the Unification Church, officially founded in 1954 in Seoul, South Korea. The church, formerly known as the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, sought to unify all Christian denominations and establish a new godly society. Central to Moon's teachings was the idea that he and his wife, Hak Ja-han, were the true parents of humanity, destined to restore the world to a sinless state. This concept of true parents was integral to the church's theology, which combined elements of Christianity with Moon's own revelations. The church taught that humanity's salvation depended on accepting Moon and his wife as the new Adam and Eve, whose union would cleanse the original sin brought by the biblical first parents. The Unification Church gained international attention for its large-scale mass weddings known as blessing ceremonies, where thousands of couples were married in highly publicized events. These ceremonies symbolized the purification of the participants and the establishment of a new divine lineage. Moon's influence extended beyond the religious sphere as he built a vast network of businesses, media outlets, and political connections, particularly in South Korea and the United States. Moon's leadership was not without controversy, though. The Unification Church was often criticized for its aggressive recruitment tactics, alleged brainwashing, and authoritarian control over members' lives. Moon himself faced legal challenges, including a conviction for tax evasion in the United States in 1982, for which he served 13 months in prison. Despite these challenges, Moon maintained a devoted following and continued to expand his influence. Politically, Moon was a staunch anti-communist and used his resources to support right-wing causes and political figures. He established newspapers like the Washington Times to promote his views and wielded significant influence in South Korean and American politics. Moon's efforts to promote Korean reunification included meetings with North Korean leaders, demonstrating his complex and pretty contradictory role as a religious and political figure. Now, Hon Ming Moon passed away in 2012, leaving behind a complex legacy. His followers still continue to uphold his teachings and the Unification Church, now known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. Alright, next up we have a pretty bad one. We have Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is a notorious figure in the world of cult leaders, primarily known for his leadership of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a polygamous sect that broke away from the mainstream Mormon church. Born in 1955, Warren Jeffs was one of many children of Rulon Jeffs, who led the FLDS before him. Raised in a polygamous family, Warren was steeped in the beliefs of the FLDS from a young age. When Rulon Jeffs died in 2002, Warren assumed control of the church, declaring himself the new prophet. He quickly began consolidating power, purging rivals, and asserting absolute authority over the FLDS community. Jeff's leadership style was authoritarian. He exerted tight control over the lives of his followers, dictating everything from their marriages to their daily activities. Central to his rule was the practice of polygamy. Jeffs arranged marriages, often between older men and very young girls, claiming these unions to be divinely ordained, which is just disgusting. This led to widespread reports of underage marriage and sexual abuse. One of the most disturbing aspects of Jeff's reign was his manipulation of religious beliefs to justify his actions. He positioned himself as the ultimate authority, claiming direct communication with God. This made it extremely difficult for followers to question or oppose him, as dissent was framed as a rebellion against divine will. Jeffs used this power to isolate his followers from the outside world, fostering an environment of fear and control. But thankfully, the law eventually caught up with Warren Jeffs. In 2006, he was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list for his role in arranging marriages between adult men and underage girls. He was apprehended later that year, and after a series of legal battles, was convicted in 2011 of sexual assault of a child and aggravated sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years. But of course, because bad guys always win, even from prison, Jeffs attempted to maintain his grip on the FLDS. He continued to issue edicts and tried to control the community through his loyal followers. But there's a silver lining, because his incarceration did lead to fractures within the group, with a lot of members leaving and the FLDS community becoming increasingly fragmented. Alright, and with that, we're going into Layer 2, starting with Jamie Gomez. Jamie Gomez, also known as Yaqub, was the founder and leader of the Nuwaubian Nation, a religious group that evolved through various stages and identities over several decades. Born on June 26, 1945 in Brooklyn, New York, Gomez's journey from a street preacher to a controversial cult leader is marked by a series of transformations and legal battles. So Gomez's early life was relatively unremarkable, but his foray into religious leadership began in the late 1960s. He started as a Muslim preacher, aligning himself with the Nation of Islam under the name Isa Muhammad. Over time, he distanced himself from mainstream Islam and began developing his own eclectic blend of beliefs, combining elements of Islam, Christianity, ancient Egyptian religion, and UFO theories. This eclecticism became a hallmark of the various movements that he would lead. So, in the early 70s, Gomez founded the, how do I pronounce this? Ansaru Allah community in Brooklyn, which initially promoted Islamic teachings. However, as Gomez's doctrines evolved, so did the group's name and focus. By the 1980s, the community had embraced a more Afrocentric and Egyptocentric identity, rebranding itself as the Nubian Islamic Hebrews and later as a Nuwaubian nation of Moors. Each transformation brought new theological elements and conspiracy theories. The group's most notable period began in the 1990s when Gomez, now calling himself Dwight York or Malachi Z. York, purchased a large tract of land in Putnam County, Georgia. There, he established a compound called Tamaray, designed to resemble an ancient Egyptian village with pyramids, statues, and other Egyptian-themed structures. This move marked the peak of the Nuwaubian nation's visibility and the beginning of heightened scrutiny from law enforcement and media. Gomez's teachings during this time became increasingly eccentric, incorporating beliefs about extraterrestrials, apocalyptic prophecies, and a unique cosmology that combined elements of various religions and mythical traditions. He claimed to be a celestial being sent to prepare humanity for an impending cataclysm, and presented himself as the savior and leader of his followers. The Nuwaubian nation's practices and Gomez's leadership style drew accusations of cult-like behavior, including allegations of manipulation, coercion, and abuse. These accusations culminated in a series of legal troubles. In 2002, Gomez was arrested on charges of child molestation and racketeering. The subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of sexual abuse involving minors, which shocked and devastated many of his followers. In 2004, Gomez was convicted of multiple counts of child molestation and sentenced to 135 years in prison. His imprisonment effectively dismantled the Nuwaubian nation's compound in Georgia, and the group dispersed. Despite his incarceration, though, unfortunately, some of his followers continued to revere him as a prophet and maintain elements of his teachings. Alright, next up we have Gorat Ratson. Gorat Ratson is an Israeli man who gained notoriety for leading a cult-like group which he referred to as a family, that reminds me of someone, that involved multiple women and children living under his control. Born in 1950, Ratson managed to exert significant influence over his followers, leading to his eventual arrest and conviction on various charges, including sexual offenses, enslavement, and financial exploitation. Ratson presented himself as a spiritual leader with supernatural powers powers, claiming to be a healer and a messianic figure. Over time, he attracted a group of women who became his partners and who believed deeply in his supported abilities and teachings. These women, who were often in vulnerable situations, entered into relationships with Ratson and bore him numerous children. Reports indicate that he fathered over 40 children with more than 20 women. The women and children lived in a communal setting where Ratson established strict rules and maintained tight control over all aspects of their lives. He dictated their daily activities, controlled their finances, and imposed severe restrictions on their interactions with the outside world. Ratson's domination extended to emotional and psychological manipulation too, reinforcing his authority and the women's dependency on him. Ratson's control was not just psychological but also practical. He reportedly assigned the women specific roles and responsibilities. They were required to contribute their earnings to the collective, and he kept a close watch on their behavior and interactions, ensuring that his authority remained unchallenged. This created an environment where dissent or any attempt to leave the group was met with severe consequences, both emotionally and in some cases physically. In 2010, Israeli authorities arrested Gorat Ratson following a lengthy investigation sparked by reports from former members of the group and concerns raised by social services. The investigation uncovered the extent of his manipulative and abusive practices, leading to his trial on multiple charges. The trial revealed harrowing details of the conditions under which the women and children lived, including the use of threats and coercion to maintain control. This guy sucks. In 2014, Ratson was convicted on a range of charges, including rape, indecent assault, and enslavement. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The conviction brought an end to his direct influence, but sadly, the impact of his actions continued to resonate with his victims and their families. This is just sad. He's still, he got caught, but they're still suffering. Next up, we have Helena Blavatsky. Helena Blavatsky was a co-founder of the Theosophical Society, a spiritual movement that emerged in the late 19th century and sought to blend Eastern and Western religious traditions. While not typically classified as a cult leader in the conventional sense, Blavatsky's influence and the devoted following that she garnered have drawn comparisons to a cult dynamic. Her life and work laid the foundations for modern esotericism and significantly impacted the spiritual landscape of her time. So born on August 12, 1831, in the Russian Empire, which is now in Ukraine, Blavatsky had a tumultuous early life marked by travel and exploration of various religious traditions. She claimed to have encountered mystical experiences and gained esoteric knowledge during her travels, particularly in India, Tibet, and Egypt. These experiences formed the basis of her later teachings and writings. In 1875, Blavatsky, along with Henry Steele Olcott and William Quan Judge, founded the Theosophical Society in New York City. The society's mission was to promote universal brotherhood, study comparative religion, philosophy, and science, and investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. Theosophy, as the movement came to be known, emphasized the pursuit of spiritual truth and the exploration of ancient wisdom traditions. Blavatsky's most significant works include Isis Unveiled from 1877 and The Secret Doctrine from 1888. These books presented a synthesis of occult, mystical, and philosophical teachings, claiming to reveal hidden truths about the nature of reality, the origins of humanity, and the cosmic order. The Secret Doctrine in particular posited the existence of a primordial wisdom tradition preserved by a group of enlightened beings known as the Masters or Mahatmas. Blavatsky's writings and teachings attracted a diverse and dedicated following, including prominent intellectuals, artists, and writers of the time. Theosophy appealed to those disillusioned with traditional religious institutions and seeking a more inclusive and spiritually enriching worldview. The movement's emphasis on unity and the interconnectedness of all life resonated with many who were exploring new, spiritual horizons. Despite her influence, though, Blavatsky was a pretty controversial figure. Critics accused her of fraud, plagiarism, and fabricating her mystical experiences and teachings. The Hodgson Report, published by the Society for Physical Research in 1885, labeled her a charlatan and discredited her claims of supernatural abilities. Blavatsky and her followers staunchly defended her integrity, and the Theosophical Society continued to grow despite these controversies. The organizational structure of the Theosophical Society under Blavatsky's leadership did exhibit some characteristics often associated with cults, such as the centralization of authority and the veneration of Blavatsky as a spiritual leader. However, the society also promoted intellectual exploration, independent thought, and comparative study, which distinguished it from more authoritarian and overtly evil cults. But Bliski was madly influential. Like, she was like, you know, like her influence extended beyond just her lifetime. It shaped the development of various spiritual and esoteric movements in the 20th century, and like the Western New Age movement and alternative like spirituality and all that. Next up, we have Hogan Fuka. Hogan Fuka is the founder of the Ho no Hana Sanpogyo, often referred to as the foot reading cult. This Japanese new religious movement gained notoriety in the 1990s for its unconventional practices and the legal controversies that have surrounded it. Fuka, born as Tsuryoshi Fuka in 1945, claimed to have received a divine revelation that gave him the ability to diagnose and cure illnesses by reading the soles of people's feet. Fukanaga's journey into spiritual leadership began after he reportedly experienced a profound personal crisis and claimed to have received spiritual enlightenment. He believed he was the reincarnation of both Jesus Christ and the Buddha, a declaration that formed the basis of his teachings and attracted a following. Hono Hana Sampogyo was officially founded in 1987, and Fukunaga quickly established himself as the group's charismatic leader. The core practice of Hono Hana Sampogyo involved foot reading, where Fukunaga and his disciples claimed to diagnose physical and spiritual ailments by examining the soles of people's feet. Followers were often told that they had serious health issues or spiritual deficiencies that required costly treatments or spiritual training sessions to rectify. These treatments and sessions could run into thousands of dollars, which created like obvious, pretty significant financial strain on the followers. Fukanaga's influence over his followers was profound. He used fear tactics, convincing people that the lives of their loved ones were in danger if they didn't follow his guidance and pay for his services. The group's teachings were a blend of traditional Japanese beliefs, elements of Buddhism, and New Age spirituality, which Fukunaga claimed were divinely revealed to him. In the late 1990s, former members and their families began to speak out against Fukunaga and Ho no Hana Senpogyo, leading to a series of lawsuits and criminal investigations. In 2000, Fukunaga was arrested and charged with fraud. Prosecutors argued that he had deceived his followers into paying exorbitant fees for fraudulent diagnoses and treatments. The trial revealed the extent of the financial exploitation, with many victims testifying about the emotional and financial toll of their involvement in the cult. In 2005, Fukunaga was found guilty of fraud and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The court's decision marked a significant moment in the fight against cultic exploitation in Japan, highlighting the need for greater protection for vulnerable individuals. That's weird, bro. Imagine your feet getting red and someone being like, "Oh, you have cancer." You can imagine going, someone's like touching your feet and they're like, "Oh, you need to forgive your parents." Dude, am I funny? Alright, next up we have Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a controversial spiritual leader who co-founded the Church Universal and Triumphant, or CUT, in the late 1970s. Her leadership and the practices within the organization have drawn comparisons to cult dynamics. So, born on April 8th, 1939 in Red Bank, New Jersey, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, originally Elizabeth Clare Wolfe, had a conventional upbringing but was drawn to spiritual matters from an early age. Her life took a significant turn when she met Mark L. Prophet, a spiritual teacher and founder of the Summit Lighthouse, an organization that promoted teachings of the Ascended Masters, spiritual beings believed to have achieved a high level of enlightenment. Elizabeth married Mark in 1963 and became deeply involved in his work. Following Mark Prophet's death in 1973, Elizabeth assumed leadership of the Summit Lighthouse. She eventually rebranded the organization as the Church Universal and Triumphant. Under her guidance, the church's teachings emphasized the teachings of the Ascended Masters, which she claimed to receive directly through channeling. These messages often included apocalyptic warnings, prophecies, and instructions for spiritual practices intended to prepare followers for the coming end times. One of the most disturbing aspects of Elizabeth Clare Prophet's leadership was her focus on doomsday predictions. She frequently warned of impending nuclear war, economic collapse, and other global catastrophes. This apocalyptic outlook led to the establishment of a series of survivalist preparations, including the construction of bomb shelters and the stockpiling of food, weapons, and supplies. In the late 1980s, Prophet predicted a nuclear war that would occur in 1990, prompting members to spend large amounts of money and time preparing for the supposed imminent disaster. The church's headquarters in Montana became the center of these preparations, with members living in a communal environment under strict guidelines. And like a lot of cult leaders, Prophet had pretty authoritarian, control over her followers' lives. Now, in addition to the apocalyptic teachings, Prophet's teachings and practices included pretty controversial elements like decrees and chants, which were believed to invoke spiritual protection and influence global events. These practices practices, along with the strict communal living arrangements, deepened the cult-like atmosphere within the group. Elizabeth Clare Prophet's health began to decline in the late 1990s due to Alzheimer's disease, leading to her gradual withdrawal from active leadership. She passed away on October 15, 2009. The Church Universal and Triumphant continues to exist, albeit with a significantly reduced following and influence. Jor GL Von Liebenfels. Jor GL von Liebenfels, born Adolf Josef Lanz in 1874 in Vienna, Austria, was an Austrian political and racial theorist who founded the Order of the New Templars, a proto-fascist organization that espoused a mixture of racial mysticism, occultism, and anti-Semitic ideology. His work and beliefs significantly influenced the development of the far right throughout Europe, particularly in the ideology of National Socialism. Lanz began his career as a monk, but left the order in 1899, reportedly due to his increasingly radical views. After leaving the monastery, he adopted the name Jor GL von Liebenfels and began developing his racial theories. He was particularly influenced by the writings of Guido von List, another Austrian occultist who advocated for a return to a mythic Aryan past. In 1905, Lanz published a book titled Theozoology, in which he outlined his belief in the superiority of the Aryan race and the need to purify humanity through selective breeding and the elimination of the inferior races. Guys, I'm just gonna say, like, this is obviously, I don't agree with this, obviously. I don't think I should have to say that, but just for the YouTube bot, I don't agree with this. I am informing and educating and entertaining about these things that were happening in history. These do not align with my views. Anyways, he combined these racial theories with elements of Christian mysticism, medieval chivalric traditions, and pseudo-scientific ideas, creating a complex and esoteric ideology. Lanz's ideas were not purely theoretical. In 1907, he founded the Order of the New Templars, an organization that sought to implement his vision of racially pure society. The order established several small communities in Austria and Germany, where members practiced a form of neo-paganism blended with Christian symbolism and conducted rituals designed to promote Aryan purity. Lanz used a swastika-like symbol as the emblem for the order, foreshadowing its later adoption by the Nazi Party. The order's activities included publishing a journal, Austera, which disseminated Lanz's racial theories and anti-Semitic propaganda. The journal attracted a readership that included some future leaders of the Nazi Party, most notably Mr. Adolf Hitler. While the extent of Hitler's personal interaction with Lanz's writing is debated, it is clear that the racial and mystical elements of Nazi ideology were influenced by the broader milieu of Volkisch and occult thought, of which Lanz was a prominent figure. Lanz's organization was never large, but it did attract a dedicated core of followers who were drawn to his vision of a renewed Aryan order. The New Templars were part of a larger trend in early 20th century Europe that saw the rise of various occult and national groups, all of which contributed to the ideological climate that eventually gave rise to fascism and National Socialism. The rise of the Nazi Party in Germany eclipsed the influence of smaller groups like the Order of the New Templars. However, Lanz continued to write and promote his ideas until his death in 1954. His legacy is a dark one, obviously, but it's cool to learn about. Next up, we have Hon Ming Chin. Hon Ming Chin is the founder and leader of the Chin Tao, or True Way cult, a Taiwanese religious group that gained notoriety in the late 90s for its bizarre beliefs and apocalyptic predictions. Chin Tao, also known as God's Salvation Church, combined elements of Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, and UFO beliefs. So, born in 1955 in Taiwan, Hon Ming Chin was originally a sociology professor. His transformation into a cult leader began in the early 1990s when he claimed to receive divine revelations. These revelations formed the basis of his teachings, which centered on the belief that God would appear on Earth in a flying saucer to save his followers from impending disaster. Chin Tao's most famous period came in 1997 when Hon Ming Chin and about 160 of his followers moved to Garland, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. Chin had predicted that God would appear on television on March 25th, 1998 to announce his arrival on Earth. This announcement was supposed to herald the beginning of a series of cataclysmic events that would culminate in the salvation of Chin's followers and the destruction of the rest of humanity. The group attracted significant media attention due to the unusual nature of their beliefs and their visible presence in Garland. Members Members wore white clothing and cowboy hats, symbolizing purity and readiness for their anticipated salvation. They also made elaborate preparations for the expected arrival of God and the subsequent end of the world. As the predicted date approached, Chin's followers became increasingly anxious and fearful. The group's activities drew the concern of local authorities and mental health professionals, who worried about the potential for mass suicide or other extreme actions if the prophecy failed. These fears were fueled by the memory of previous apocalyptic cults, such as the Heaven's Gate group, which had committed mass suicide in 1997. When March 25th, 1988 came and went without any divine appearance on television or the expected cataclysmic events, many of Chin's followers were devastated. The failed prophecy led to disillusionment and the departure of some members. Hon Ming Chin attempted to rationalize the failure, suggesting that his calculations might have been incorrect or that divine intervention had altered the timeline. Despite the failure of his major prophecy, Chin continued to lead a pretty diminished group of followers. The group eventually left Garland and returned to Taiwan, where they maintained a lower profile. Hon Ming Chin's influence waned, but he continued to promote his beliefs to a smaller audience. Alright, and next up we have Wallace Muhammad. Wallace Muhammad is a figure that's pretty shrouded in mystery. He's known for founding the Nation of Islam in the early 20th century. So Fard appeared in Detroit around 1930, claiming to be a prophet and a divine messenger. He taught a blend of Islam and black nationalism, asserting that African Americans were the original people and that they should reclaim their identity and heritage. This message resonated deeply with the black community in Detroit, especially given the harsh racial discrimination and economic challenges they faced during that era. Fard's teachings were a mixture of religious doctrine and empowerment, but they also contained some disturbing and controversial elements. He preached that white people were inherently evil, created by an evil scientist named Yakub. This racially charged narrative was aimed at instilling a sense of pride and superiority among African Americans, but also fostered division and hostility towards other races. The mysterious aspect of Fard's life is amplified by his sudden disappearance in 1934. After a few years of active preaching and establishing the NOI, or Nation of Islam, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of questions and speculations. Some believe that he was arrested and deported, while others think he was assassinated or simply chose to disappear. Elijah Muhammad, Fard's most devoted follower, took over the leadership of the NOI after Fard's disappearance. Elijah elevated Fard to a godlike status within the movement, referring to him as Allah incarnate. This deification added to the cult-like atmosphere surrounding Fard's legacy, with followers venerating him and strictly adhering to these teachings that he left behind. Alright, here we got a fun one. Next up is Rael, born Claude Vorihon. He was a Frenchman who founded the Raelian movement, a UFO religion in the 1970s. This movement is known for its unorthodox beliefs, including the idea that life on Earth was created by an extraterrestrial species called the Elohim. Rael's life and the religion he founded are intriguing, controversial, and often seen as bizarre. So, in 1973, Rael claimed to have had a life-changing encounter with a being from another planet. According to Rael, this extraterrestrial, who called himself Yahweh, told him that humanity was created by advanced scientists from another world, the Elohim. Yahweh took Rael on a journey to their planet, revealing the secrets of the universe and humanity's true origins. Rael was given the mission to spread these revelations on Earth and prepare humanity for the return of the Elohim. The Raelian movement's beliefs center on the idea that the Elohim will return to Earth when humanity is ready. This invokes building an embassy to welcome them, which Rael and his followers have been advocating for since the movement's inception. Rael also teaches that humanity can achieve immortality through scientific advancements, and that we should embrace a hedonistic lifestyle, free from guilt and repression. The movement promotes a variety of practices and ideas that many find controversial or disturbing. For instance, Rael emphasizes the importance of sensuality and sexual freedom, advocating for a liberal attitude towards sex and relationships. This has led to accusations of this movement being a sex cult, although Rael insists that their practices are consensual and aimed at personal liberation. One of the most controversial aspects of the Raelian movement is its stance on cloning. In the early 2000s, a company affiliated with the movement, Clonade, claimed to have successfully cloned a human being. This claim was met with widespread skepticism and criticism from the scientific community and ethical watchdogs. And while no concrete evidence was provided to support Clonade's claims, the incident did bring significant attention and notoriety to Rael and his followers. Rael's leadership style and the structure of the Raelian movement have also drawn comparisons to more traditional cults. Rael is seen as a charismatic leader who exerts significant influence over his followers. The movement has a hierarchical structure, with Rael at the top, followed by a council of, quote, guides, who help disseminate his teachings and maintain order within the community. This setup, combined with Rael's unusual teachings and the emphasis on obedience to his vision, reinforces the perception of the movement as being cult-like. Next up, we have Yahweh Bin Yahweh. Yahweh Bin Yahweh, born Hulan Mitchell Jr., was a controversial religious leader who founded the Nation of Yahweh, a black supremacist sect in the late 1970s. Mitchell was born in 1935 in Oklahoma and had a fairly conventional upbringing. He was raised in the Church of Christ and even served in the Air Force, and now in the 1970s he moved to Miami, Florida, where he began to attract followers with his teachings that combined elements of Christianity, Judaism, and black nationalism. He adopted the name Yahweh Bin Yahweh, which means God, Son of God in Hebrew, and proclaimed himself the Messiah. The Nation of Yahweh preached a doctrine that claimed African Americans were the true Israelites and that they should reclaim their identities and heritage. Yahweh Bin Yahweh's teachings were initially focused on uplifting the black community, promoting self-reliance, and encouraging economic independence. His followers, known as the Yahwehs, were expected to adhere to a strict moral code, including abstaining from drugs, alcohol, and promiscuity. However, Yahweh Bin Yahweh's leadership style and the practices of the Nation of Islam soon took a darker turn. He demanded absolute loyalty from his followers and created a cult-like environment where dissent was not tolerated. The group became known for its paramilitary discipline, with members often seen dressed in white robes and turbans patrolling their neighborhoods. In the 1980s, the Nation of Yahweh began to gain significant attention for its community development efforts, including buying and renovating properties in the blighted areas of Miami. However, behind this facade of community development, there were sinister activities taking place. Yahweh Bin Yahweh and several of his followers were implicated in a series of violent crimes, including extortion, arson, and murder. The most notorious aspect of Yahweh Bin Yahweh's criminal activities was the so-called, quote, blood covenant, a ritualistic initiation that allegedly involved the killing of a white person as a demonstration of loyalty. Several murders were attributed to the group, with former members testifying about the brutal enforcement of Yahweh Bin Yahweh's commands. In 1990, Yahweh Bin Yahweh was arrested and charged with multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder and racketeering. The trial revealed the extent of the violence and intimidation within the Nation of Yahweh. Despite his defense that he was a man of peace and that the charges were racially motivated, he was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. He was released on parole in 2001 under strict conditions that included a ban on contact with his former followers. Alright, next up we got Vil Labarin. Vil Labarin was one of those figures who really makes you question the fine line between religious fervor and outright fanaticism. Born in 1925 in a Mormon colony in Mexico, he was one of many children in a large family that took his faith very seriously. His father, Alma Dayer Labarin, was a key figure in the early Mormon fundamentalist movement, so Vil grew up steeped in these beliefs. The story gets really intense when Vil and his brother Joel start having disagreements about how their religious community should be run. Joel was leader of a sect called the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, and when he refused to adopt some of Vil's more extreme ideas, things went south quickly. In 1972, Vil broke away and formed his own group, the Church of the Lamb of God. Vil's leadership style was, to put it mildly, authoritarian. He believed in blood atonement, which is a pretty grim idea that some sins are so severe that the only way to atone for them is through the sinner's death. This wasn't just a theoretical belief for Vil, he took it very seriously. In 1972, Joel was murdered, and it was widely believed that Vil orchestrated the hit. This was just the beginning. Vil's reign of terror extended far beyond his brother. He ordered the killings of many others, including family members and followers who he felt were disloyal or posed a threat to his power. One particularly disturbing aspect of Vil's rule was his use of his own children to carry out his murderous orders. The cult's activities were brutal, and the fear within the community was palpable. The authorities eventually caught up with him, and in 1979 he was convicted of ordering the murder of an opponent, Rulon Alfred, another polygamous leader. Vil was sentenced to life in prison, but the violence didn't stop there. Even from behind bars, he continued to control his followers and order killings. He died in prison in 1981, but his death still didn't bring an end to his bloodshed. His, quote, hit list, a list of people he deemed traitors or enemies, continued to cost deaths for years. Alright, now we got David Berg. David Berg, also known as Moses David or Mo, was the founder of the Children of God, later known as the Family International, a religious movement that emerged in the late 1960s. Berg's life and the group he led are often discussed with a mix of fascination and horror because of the controversial and often disturbing practices that he promoted. Berg was born in 1919 19 in Oakland, California, into a deeply religious family. His parents were evangelical ministers, and he grew up with a strong grounding in Christian doctrine. However, Berg's path soon diverged significantly from mainstream Christianity. In the late 1960s, during the height of the counterculture movement, he began to attract a group of young followers who were disillusioned with traditional society and searching for spiritual answers. The Children of God started as a communal Christian-based group that focused on spreading the message of Jesus and living a life free of materialism. Berg's charisma and apocalyptic teachings quickly drew in many young people. He presented himself as a prophet, claiming to receive direct revelations from God, which he shared through a series of publications called the Mo Letters. As the movement grew, Berg's teachings became increasingly radical and controversial. One of the most disturbing aspects was his promotion of flirty fishing, a practice that encouraged female members to use sex to attract new followers and financial support. This method, which Berg justified with twisted interpretations of Christian love and evangelism, led to widespread exploitation and abuse within the group. Berg's control over his followers was absolute. He maintained strict oversight of their lives, dictating everything from their relationships to their daily activities. The communal living arrangements meant that members had little privacy and were often isolated from the outside world. Berg's teachings included a mix of apocalyptic warnings, encouragement to cut ties with non-believers, including family members, and bizarre doctrines about sexuality. One of the darkest aspects of Berg's leadership was the widespread allegation of child abuse within the Children of God. Former members have come forward with harrowing accounts of sexual abuse, often involving minors, which was allegedly justified by Berg's perverse interpretations of religious teachings. These practices have cast a long shadow over the movement and led to a significant legal and social repercussions. In the 1990s and 1980s, as allegations of abuse became public, the group faced intense scrutiny and backlash. They rebranded themselves as the Family International in an attempt to distance themselves from their controversial past. Berg remained a reclusive figure, continuing to lead the group from various secret locations until his death in 1994. Alright, and that's gonna do it for this video. This is half the iceberg. I'm gonna cover the other half in a different video, so subscribe if you want to see second half. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe, have a great day, and sweet dreams.